the fog-shrouded streets of 1930s London, the private clinic of Dr. Reginald Hawthorne stood like a sentinel against the night. It was just past midnight when the maid, her hands trembling, burst into the operating theatre. There lay the renowned surgeon sprawled across the sterile table, a scalpel embedded in his chest. Blood pooled beneath him, mingling with the antiseptic scent that hung heavy in the air. A hastily scrawled note clutched in his fist read, "I can no longer bear the guilt." The police dismissed it as suicide, a man haunted by a recent botched operation. But whispers of foul play echoed through the corridors. Who would benefit from silencing the brilliant mind that had saved so many lives? The stage was set for a puzzle that demanded the little grey cells of none other than Hercule Poirot. Chapter 1. The Midnight Discovery. The fog clung to the cobblestone streets of 1930s London like a shroud, muffling the distant chime of Big Ben as it struck midnight. In the heart of Harley Street, where the elite sought solace from their ailments, stood the private clinic of Dr. Reginald Hawthorne, a bastion of medical excellence amid the city's ceaseless hum. The building, a stately Georgian edifice with wrought-iron gates and polished brass plaques, exuded an air of unassailable respectability. Yet, on this particular November evening in 1932, an unnatural stillness had descended upon it, broken only by the occasional hoot of an owl from the nearby Regent's Park. Inside, the corridors were dimly lit by gas lamps that flickered like hesitant guardians against the encroaching darkness. The air was thick with the sterile tang of carbolic acid and ether, a scent that spoke of lives mended and miracles performed. Dr. Hawthorne, a man in his late 50s with a reputation as formidable as his surgical precision, had been working late. His clinic was renowned for treating the aristocracy and the affluent, from minor nobility to captains of industry. Hawthorne's hands had steadied the hearts of dukes and stitched the wounds of war heroes. But tonight, those same hands lay idle, forever stilled. It was young Elsie Hargrove, the maid, a slip of a girl, no more than 19, with wide eyes and a cap perpetually askew, who made the grim discovery. She had been roused from her attic quarters by a peculiar noise, a thud that echoed through the empty halls like a muffled cry. Clad in her nightdress and a hastily thrown-on shawl, she descended the creaking stairs, her candle casting elongated shadows that danced menacingly on the walls. The operating theatre was on the ground floor, a room of gleaming white tiles and chrome instruments, where Hawthorne performed his most intricate procedures. As Elsie pushed open the heavy oak door, a draught extinguished her candle, plunging her into momentary blackness. She fumbled for the electric switch, her heart pounding in her chest. The harsh overhead light buzzed to life, revealing a scene that would haunt her dreams for years to come. There, sprawled across the cold steel operating table, lay Dr. Hawthorne himself. His white coat was stained crimson, a stark contrast to the pristine surroundings. A scalpel, his own, no doubt, from the set engraved with his initials, protruded from his chest, buried hilt deep just above the heart. Blood had pooled beneath him, seeping into the grout lines of the tiles, forming rivulets that resembled accusing fingers pointing toward the door. Elsie's scream pierced the silence, a raw, primal sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of the clinic. She staggered back, her hands flying to her mouth, the candle tumbling forgotten to the floor. In the doctor's limp right hand, clutched as if in a final act of desperation, was a crumpled piece of paper. Trembling, she approached, her slippers squelching in the congealing blood. With fingers that felt like lead, she pried it free. The note, Scrawled in what appeared to be Hawthorne's elegant script read, "I can no longer bear the guilt. Forgive me." The words blurred through her tears. Guilt? What guilt could drive a man of such stature to this? The police arrived swiftly, summoned by a neighbour who had heard Elsie's cries. Inspector Harold Jenkins, a burly man with a moustache that rivaled a walrus's and a no-nonsense demeanour honed from years on the beat, took charge. His team cordoned off the area, their boots tracking mud onto the once immaculate floors. "Looks like a clear case of suicide," Jenkins grunted, lighting a cigarette despite the no-smoking signs. "Man's been under pressure. That botched operation last month. Lady died on the table. Papers were full of it. Must have weighed on him." The botched operation in question had indeed been a scandal. Lady Margaret Forsyth, wife of a prominent MP, had sought Hawthorne's expertise for a routine appendectomy. Complications arose, sepsis they said, and she perished despite his efforts. Whispers of negligence had circulated in the clubs and drawing rooms of high society. Hawthorne, ever the stoic professional, had issued a statement expressing profound regret, but maintained his innocence. Yet, the toll on his reputation was evident. Patients cancelled appointments, and colleagues distanced themselves. As the constables photographed the scene and dusted for prints, Elsie was questioned in the adjacent waiting room. She sat huddled in a chair, a blanket draped over her shoulders, sipping tepid tea provided by a sympathetic officer. "He was alone, sir," she stammered to Inspector Jenkins. "The last patient left at 8. Nurse Benson went home at 9, and I locked up after that. The doctor said he had paperwork to finish." Jenkins nodded, jotting notes in his battered notebook. "Any visitors? Arguments?" Elsie shook her head. "None that I heard, but he seemed troubled lately, pacing at night, muttering to himself." Outside, the fog thickened, swallowing the street lamps in a milky haze. Word of the tragedy spread like wildfire through the neighbourhood. Curious onlookers gathered at the gates, their faces illuminated by the flash of reporters' cameras. The press had descended en masse, hungry for a story that blended prestige with peril. "Surgeon's suicide shock," one headline would scream the next morning. But amid the clamour, a few keen observers noted discrepancies. Why would a surgeon choose a scalpel for such an act? And the angle of the wound? Awkward for self-infliction, some murmured. Unbeknownst to the police, the clinic held secrets beyond the obvious. In Hawthorne's private office, adjacent to the theatre, drawers brimmed with confidential files, records of experimental procedures, financial ledgers showing debts from lavish living, and correspondence hinting at professional rivalries. Dr. Victor Lang, a colleague at a competing practice, had recently accused Hawthorne of poaching patients. Then there was Lady Eleanor Hawthorne, the doctor's elegant wife, known for her social ambitions and rumoured indiscretions, and Miss Clara Benson, the devoted nurse whose admiration for her employer bordered on obsession. As the body was wheeled out under a sheet destined for the morgue, Inspector Jenkins sealed the room. "We'll wrap this up quickly," he assured the staff. "No need to alarm the public." But deep down, a nagging doubt gnawed at him. The note seemed too pat, the scene too staged. Suicide, perhaps? But what if it masked something sinister? A murder disguised as despair. Miles away, in his comfortable apartment at Whitehaven Mansions, Hercule Poirot stirred in his sleep. The Belgian detective with his egg-shaped head, meticulously waxed moustache, and unparalleled little grey cells was no stranger to the macabre. He had solved cases that baffled Scotland Yard, from poisoned chocolates to locked room enigmas. Little did he know that dawn would bring a summons from an old friend, Inspector Japp, pulling him into a labyrinth of lies and legacies. Back at the clinic, as the clock ticked toward 1, Elsie extinguished the lights one by one. The building creaked in the wind, as if mourning its master. In the shadows of the operating theatre, a faint footprint, overlooked in the initial sweep, lingered in the blood, too delicate for a man's boot. And outside, in the alleyway, a figure melted into the fog, having witnessed more than they should. The stage was set, the players assembled, for a drama that would unravel the facade of Harley Street's finest. The night wore on, the fog lifting slightly as the first hints of dawn painted the sky. London awoke to the news. Society abuzz with speculation. Who would inherit Hawthorne's fortune? What scandals lay buried in his past? The apparent suicide was merely the opening act in a tale of intrigue, where every clue led to another deception. Poirot, upon receiving Japp's call, would later reflect on that midnight discovery as the spark that ignited his investigation. "Mon ami," he would say, "the simplest explanation is often the most deceptive. One must look beyond the blood and the note to the hearts of those left behind." But for now, in the quiet aftermath, the clinic stood silent, its secrets guarded by the dead. Chapter 2. The Call to Poirot. In the soft glow of his reading lamp, Hercule Poirot reclined in his favourite armchair within the elegant confines of his apartment at Whitehaven Mansions. The year was 1932, and London lay shrouded in the chill of an early winter morning, though the detectives' rooms were a haven of warmth and order. The walls, lined with bookshelves brimming with volumes on psychology and criminology, reflected Poirot's insatiable curiosity about the human mind. His tailored suit, a masterpiece of Savile Row craftsmanship, hung impeccably on his slight frame, and his patent leather shoes gleamed as if polished by an army of valets. Though, in truth, it was the meticulous work of his faithful manservant, George. Poirot sipped delicately from a china cup filled with his preferred tisane, a herbal infusion of chamomile and mint that soothed his nerves and sharpened his thoughts. The aroma wafted through the air, mingling with the faint scent of beeswax from the polished mahogany furniture. It was a moment of perfect tranquillity, the kind Poirot cherished amid the chaos of his investigative life. Outside, the first light of dawn pierced the curtains, casting a pale hue over the room. The city was awakening. Milk carts clattered on the streets below, and the distant whistle of a train echoed from Paddington Station. The shrill ring of the telephone shattered the peace like a gunshot in a library. Poirot set down his cup with a slight frown, his egg-shaped head tilting as he regarded the instrument with mild annoyance. "Allo?" he answered, his voice carrying the precise, accented tones of his Belgian heritage. On the other end was Inspector James Japp of Scotland Yard, a man Poirot had crossed paths with on numerous occasions. Japp's Cockney inflection was unmistakable, laced with the urgency of a fresh case. "Poirot, old chap, sorry to rouse you at this ungodly hour, but we've got a queer one on our hands. Dr. Reginald Hawthorne, top surgeon in Harley Street, found dead in his own clinic last night. Looks like suicide, but something doesn't sit right. The family's kicking up a fuss, insisting on discretion. Thought you might lend your, little grey cells to the matter." Poirot's moustache twitched with intrigue, a telltale sign of his piqued interest. He straightened in his chair, his green eyes sparkling with the thrill of a new puzzle. "Mon ami Japp, you know well that Hercule Poirot does not believe in coincidences. the apparent suicide. It is often the cleverest disguise for murder most foul. Tell me, what are the details?" Japp recounted the scene. The scalpel in the chest, the note of guilt, the botched operation that had plagued Hawthorne's conscience. The maid found him just after midnight. No signs of struggle, door locked from inside. But the family's got pull. Hawthorne treated half the House of Lords. We need this wrapped up neat-like, without scandal. Poirot pondered for a moment, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Very well, Inspector. I shall arrive at the clinic by dawn. Prepare the scene for my inspection." Hanging up, he summoned George with a brisk ring of the bell. "George, my coat and hat. There is work to be done." The manservant, ever efficient, appeared promptly, helping Poirot into his overcoat. As they descended in the lift, Poirot's mind raced ahead, envisioning the crime scene. Suicide? Perhaps, but the human soul was a complex labyrinth, and guilt alone rarely drove a man of science to such extremes. The taxi ride through the awakening streets was swift. Fog lingered in patches, swirling around lampposts like ghostly sentinels. Harley Street emerged as a row of dignified facades, each housing medical luminaries. The clinic's gates were guarded by a constable, who nodded as Poirot presented himself. Inside, the air was heavy with the remnants of antiseptic and something more sinister: the metallic tang of blood. Japp greeted him in the foyer, his face etched with fatigue. "Glad you're here, Poirot. Coroner's taken the body, but we've kept the room as is." The operating theatre was a study in clinical precision, now marred by tragedy. The table, scrubbed but stained with faint reddish outlines, stood central. Instruments lay in orderly trays, glinting under the electric lights. Poirot's keen eyes scanned every detail: the position of the chairs, the angle of the overhead lamp, the faint smudges on the door handle. Ah, the scent of ether. It lingers, does it not? And this glove, misplaced on the floor. Most curious. He donned his own kid gloves before picking it up. A surgical glove, left-handed, with a trace of powder inside. Questioning the staff began in earnest. Elsie, the maid, repeated her tale, her voice quivering. "He was alone, sir. I swear it." Poirot nodded sympathetically. "And yet, mademoiselle, the door was locked. From inside." She confirmed, but mentioned overhearing raised voices earlier that evening. "The doctor's wife, Lady Eleanor, she visited around 10. They argued, something about money or affections." Poirot's eyebrows rose. Jealousy, a classic motive. He made a mental note: the wife must be interviewed. As he delved deeper, suspicions coalesced. The clinic's ledger, glimpsed in Hawthorne's office, showed irregularities, payments to unnamed parties. A rival, perhaps, or a disgruntled patient. Poirot's grey cells hummed with activity, weaving threads of possibility into a tapestry of intrigue. Japp watched, impressed despite himself. "You see things I miss, Poirot. Always do." Exiting the clinic as the sun crested the rooftops, Poirot paused. A shadow flickered in the alley opposite. A figure darting away, coat collar turned up. "Someone watches, mon ami," he murmured to Japp. "The game is afoot." The inspector grunted. "Paranoia?" But Poirot shook his head. "No, Inspector. In murder, there are always eyes in the shadows." The morning air invigorated him as he hailed another taxi, bound for the Hawthorne residence. The puzzle had begun, and Hercule Poirot relished the challenge. What secrets hid behind the facade of medical respectability? Only time and deduction would tell. Chapter 3. The Grieving Widow. The Hawthorne residence in Mayfair was a testament to refined opulence. a townhouse of cream-coloured stone with ivy climbing its facade like veins of forgotten secrets. It was mid-morning when Hercule Poirot arrived, the sun struggling through the persistent London haze to cast a muted light on the black mourning crepe draped over the door-knocker. A butler, stiff as a starched collar, admitted him with a murmur of deference, leading him through a marble-floored hall adorned with oil paintings of stern ancestors and vases of wilting lilies. The air carried the faint perfume of grief. Roses mingled with the subtle undercurrent of cigar smoke from evenings past. Lady Eleanor Hawthorne awaited in the drawing-room, a chamber of velvet drapes and gilded mirrors that reflected her poised figure like a portrait in perpetual mourning. She was a woman of striking beauty, perhaps in her early 40s, with raven hair swept into an elegant chignon, and eyes the colour of storm-tossed seas. Clad in a black silk gown that whispered of Parisian couture, she rose gracefully as Poirot entered. Extending a gloved hand, "Monsieur Poirot, how kind of you to come. Inspector Japp spoke highly of your discretion." Her voice was melodic, tempered by a practised sorrow, though Poirot detected the faintest tremor, a crack in the veneer. "Madame," Poirot replied, bowing slightly as he took her hand, his moustache quivering with polite sympathy. "It is the tragedy most profound that brings me here. The loss of a husband, especially one so eminent as Dr. Hawthorne, must weigh heavily upon the soul." He settled into a plush armchair opposite her, his keen gaze absorbing every detail. The diamond necklace at her throat, an extravagance that seemed at odds with fresh widowhood, the slight redness around her eyes, suggestive of tears shed, or perhaps feigned, the way her fingers toyed with a lace handkerchief, betraying underlying nerves. Eleanor nodded, her composure a shield. "Reginald was a genius, Monsieur Poirot, a surgeon whose skills bordered on the miraculous. He saved lives that others deemed lost, but genius comes at a cost. He was tormented by his failures, particularly that dreadful incident with Lady Forsyth. The press hounded him, society whispered. It broke something in him." She paused, dabbing at her eyes. Poirot leaned forward, his voice gentle yet probing. "And this torment, madame, it manifested how? Sleepless nights? Arguments, perhaps?" She hesitated, her gaze drifting to the window where the fog pressed, against the panes like an uninvited guest. "He withdrew into his work, spending endless hours at the clinic. We grew distant, but suicide? I cannot fathom it. Reginald was resilient, a fighter." Poirot noted the shift in her tone, a defensive edge. "Madame, forgive the intrusion, but did he have enemies? In the medical world, rivalries can be fierce." Eleanor's lips tightened. "There was Dr. Victor Lang, a colleague at Harley Street. They competed for patients, for acclaim. At a recent conference, Reginald overshadowed him with a groundbreaking paper on thoracic surgery. Lang was envious, bitterly so. He made veiled threats in letters. Professional sabotage, he called it." Poirot's grey cells stirred. Envy, a motive as old as Cain. "And your husband's state of mind on that fateful evening? You visited the clinic, no?" Eleanor blinked, surprise flickering across her features. "How did you—" "Yes, around 10 o'clock. I brought him supper, as I often did. We spoke briefly. He seemed preoccupied, but not despondent." Her alibi emerged unbidden. "I left shortly after and joined friends for a bridge game at the Duchess of Arlington's home. We played until midnight. Several can vouch for me." The detective nodded, but his mind catalogued inconsistencies. The maid had mentioned raised voices. An argument perhaps glossed over. "Your marriage, madame. It was happy?" Eleanor's cheeks flushed faintly. "As happy as any in our circles. Reginald devoted himself to his patients, sometimes at the expense of us, but I loved him dearly." A single tear traced her cheek, glistening like a diamond. Genuine, Poirot wondered, or a performance worthy of the West End? As conversation waned, Poirot rose to examine the room, his movements deliberate. A side table held a silver tray with calling cards. Nearby, a wastebasket caught his eye. Feigning interest in a nearby vase, he glimpsed a torn envelope within, fragments of script visible. With a subtle flick of his cane, he nudged it into view. Addressed to my dearest Eleanor from an unsigned sender, the words hinted at ardour, "Cannot wait to hold you again." A lover? Motive for murder, if discovered by a jealous husband. "Madam," Poirot said, turning with feigned casualness, "one must consider all possibilities. The note found with your husband. I can no longer bear the guilt." "What guilt, precisely?" Eleanor faltered. "The operation, I suppose. Or perhaps financial strains. The clinic was prosperous, but expenses mounted." Poirot pressed gently. "And inheritance? Who benefits?" She met his gaze steadily. "I do, primarily, but also his partner and a trust for medical research." Leaving the residence, Poirot's mind whirled like a kaleidoscope of clues. The widow's poise masked depths: jealousy, infidelity, greed. The torn letter, a red herring, or the thread to unravel the tapestry. As his taxi pulled away, he spotted a figure lingering across the street, a man in a fedora, watching intently, before vanishing into the crowd. Surveillance, or paranoia induced by the fog of deception. The plot thickened, drawing Poirot deeper into the labyrinth. Lady Eleanor's tears might water the seeds of truth, or drown them in artifice. Only further deduction would reveal which. Chapter 4. The Rival's Ambition. The afternoon sun filtered through the grimy windows of Harley Street, casting elongated shadows across the cluttered office of Dr. Victor Lang. Unlike the pristine elegance of Hawthorne's clinic, Lang's domain was a testament to chaotic ambition. A room crammed with leather-bound tomes on anatomy, scattered surgical diagrams, and the pervasive haze of cigar smoke that clung to the air like a persistent fog. Shelves groaned under the weight of medical curiosities. Preserved specimens in jars. Antique instruments glinting malevolently. And framed certificates proclaiming Lang's accolades, though fewer in number than his rivals. The man himself sat behind a massive oak desk, a tall, angular figure with a hawkish nose and piercing blue eyes that seemed to dissect anyone who entered his gaze. His hair, streaked with premature grey, was slicked back, and his fingers drummed impatiently on a blotter stained with ink and ash. Hercule Poirot entered with his characteristic poise, his cane tapping rhythmically on the Persian rug. The air was thick, not just with smoke, but with an undercurrent of tension, as if the room itself anticipated confrontation. "Dr. Lang," Poirot began, his voice smooth as polished marble, "I am Hercule Poirot, here at the behest of Scotland Yard, to inquire into the unfortunate demise of your colleague, Dr. Reginald Hawthorne." Lang rose, extending a hand with feigned warmth, though his grip was firm, almost challenging. "Monsieur Poirot, your reputation precedes you. A tragedy, indeed. Please, sit. Cigar." He gestured to a humidor, but Poirot declined with a polite wave. "Non, merci. The little grey cells, they prefer clarity over clouds." Lang settled back, lighting a fresh cigar with deliberate slowness, exhaling a plume that obscured his features momentarily. Hawthorne was a brilliant man, but reckless. That failed operation on Lady Forsyth, it tarnished us all. The public loses faith in one surgeon, and suddenly we're all butchers. His tone carried a veneer of sorrow, but Poirot detected the undernote of satisfaction, like a predator eyeing a fallen competitor. "You speak of recklessness, Doctor. Yet envy, it is a motive as sharp as any scalpel. At the recent medical conference, Dr. Hawthorne's presentation on innovative thoracic techniques eclipsed your own. Non. Whispers suggest you were displeased." Lang's eyes narrowed, the cigar pausing mid-puff. Envy, perhaps professional jealousy, yes. Hawthorne had a knack for the spotlight, stealing patients with his charm and connections. But murder? Preposterous. I was dining alone at my club that night, the Athenaeum. The doorman can confirm I arrived at 9 and left past midnight. Poirot nodded, jotting a mental note. Alibis, like fine china, could crack under pressure. He rose, circling the room with apparent casualness, his eyes alighting on Lang's collection of surgical instruments displayed in a glass case. Gleaming scalpels, forceps, retractors, all meticulously arranged. But one slot was empty. A scalpel, identical in design to the one found in Hawthorne's chest, engraved with a similar flourish. "Ah, Doctor, this collection, it is most impressive. But here, a vacancy, a scalpel missing, perhaps." Lang's face paled slightly, though he recovered with a chuckle. "An oversight. Lent it to a student, I believe, or misplaced in the rush of practice." Sweat beaded on his brow despite the room's chill. Poirot's moustache twitched. "Most convenient. And tell me, the partnership in Hawthorne's clinic, rumours suggest you stand to inherit a share upon his death. A motive, some might say, for hastening that event." Lang stubbed out his cigar forcefully. "Inheritance? A minor stake, nothing more. Hawthorne promised it years ago, but our relations soured. If you're implying—" Poirot raised a hand, placating. "Imply? Non. Merely observe. The human heart, it beats with ambitions that sometimes override ethics." As the conversation turned to Hawthorne's financial woes, malpractice suits draining his coffers, Lang revealed more than intended. He was in debt, you know. Borrowed from unsavoury lenders to maintain that lavish lifestyle. Perhaps the guilt was from that, not just the operation. Poirot probed deeper. "And your visit to the clinic that night? A nurse mentioned seeing you there around 11. Lang's nervous tick emerged, a subtle twitch of the left eye. "Nonsense! I was at the club. That nurse, Clara Benson, is it? She's infatuated with Hawthorne. Unreliable." The detective departed, but not before planting a seed of doubt. "Au revoir, Doctor. The truth, it has a way of surfacing, like a bubble in the ether." Outside, the street bustled with carriages and pedestrians, the fog beginning to descend once more. Poirot lingered, feigning adjustment of his gloves, when a young nurse, not Clara, but another from the clinic, approached furtively. "Monsieur Poirot, I overheard your questions. Dr. Lang did visit that night. Argued with Dr. Hawthorne about money, embezzlement, I think. He left in a rage." Her voice trembled, eyes darting. "But please, don't say it was me." Poirot's mind raced, piecing fragments, the missing scalpel, the alibi's fragility, the whisper of financial intrigue. Was Lang the architect of murder, disguising it as suicide to claim his rival's empire? Or a red herring, diverting from deeper shadows? As he hailed a cab, a chilling realization dawned. Someone had tampered with the crime scene post-discovery. The glove, the footprint, clues manipulated. The web of ambition spun wider, ensnaring all in its threads. But as the cab pulled away, a figure in the alley, Lang, himself, watched with predatory intent. The game escalated, promising peril in the pursuit of truth. Chapter 5. The Nurse's Devotion. The modest lodgings of Miss Clara Benson lay in a quiet side street off Harley Street, a humble contrast to the grandeur of the clinics she served. It was a narrow terraced house, its facade weathered by London's incessant damp, with lace curtains framing windows that offered glimpses of a life devoted to duty. Hercule Poirot arrived as the evening shadows lengthened, the gas lamps flickering to life along the pavement like hesitant stars. The air carried the faint aroma of coal smoke and boiled cabbage from neighbouring kitchens, a reminder of the working-class world that underpinned the opulence of Mayfair. Clara answered the door herself, her nurse's uniform still crisp despite the day's end, though faint bloodstains, remnants of the tragic discovery, marred the cuffs. She was a woman in her late 20s, with mousy brown hair pinned neatly under her cap and eyes that held a quiet intensity, like embers smouldering beneath ash. Her hands, calloused from years of handling instruments and tending wounds, fidgeted with the door latch as she ushered Poirot inside. The sitting room was sparse. A worn settee, a small table with a vase of faded daisies, and walls adorned with framed certificates from nursing school. A faint scent of lavender soap lingered, masking the underlying odour of antiseptic that seemed ingrained in her very being. "Monsieur Poirot?" she said, her voice steady but laced with weariness. "I've been expecting you. The police have already questioned me, but if there's more I can do to find justice for Dr. Hawthorne—" She gestured for him to sit, pouring tea from a chipped pot with hands that trembled slightly. Poirot observed her closely, noting the pallor of her cheeks and the way her gaze darted to a small photograph on the mantel, a portrait of Hawthorne, smiling confidently in his white coat. "Mademoiselle Benson, you were close to the doctor, no?" His right hand in the operating theatre, perhaps even in matters of the heart? Clara's cup clattered against its saucer. "Close? I admired him greatly. He was like a father to me, mentoring, guiding. In a world where women like me are often overlooked, he saw potential." But Poirot's keen eyes detected the flush creeping up her neck, the subtle quiver in her lip. Unrequited love, he surmised, a motive as potent as poison. And this admiration, it remained platonic. The heart, it can complicate even the most professional bonds. She set down her tea, her eyes welling. I cared for him deeply. Confessed my feelings once, after a long surgery. He was kind but firm. His heart belonged to his work, and to Lady Eleanor. It stung, but I accepted it. Poirot nodded sympathetically, his moustache concealing a thoughtful frown. "Your movements that night, mademoiselle? You left the clinic at 9, but the maid heard footsteps later." Clara's, fingers twisted in her lap. "I prepared instruments until late, then went home. Alone, yes, no one to confirm, but I swear I was here by 10. Her alibi hung thin as gossamer. Poirot rose, pacing the room with deliberate steps, his cane tapping softly. His gaze fell upon a small jewellery box on the sideboard. "May I?" he inquired. With reluctant permission, he opened it to reveal a locket, gold, engraved with intricate filigree. Inside, a miniature photo of Hawthorne gazed back, his eyes kind, yet distant. "A memento," Clara whispered, her voice breaking. "He gave it to me years ago, as thanks for my dedication. Nothing more." But Poirot's grey cells whirred. Sentiment or obsession? He recalled the clinic's inventory, a vial of sedative missing from the dispensary. "This sedative, mademoiselle. It could subdue a man without struggle, making murder appear as self-inflicted despair. You have access, knowledge of dosages." Clara's eyes widened in horror. "You think I— No, I loved him. I would never harm him. If anything, I protected him from those vultures circling his success." Poirot pressed gently. "Vultures? Like Dr. Lang, perhaps? Or Mr. Greaves, the bereaved husband?" She leaned forward, her devotion spilling forth like a confession. "Lang embezzled from the clinic partnership. I overheard them arguing weeks ago, and Greaves threatened Reginald after his wife's death. But Eleanor? She was cold, ambitious, spent his money on frivolities while he toiled." Jealousy laced her words. A red herring or genuine insight? Poirot filed it away. As twilight deepened, Clara escorted him to the door, her composure cracking. "Monsieur, not everyone is as they seem. Look to the shadows in his life, the debts, the rivals." A warning or deflection? Poirot stepped into the cooling air, but paused. "One more thing, mademoiselle. The footprint in the blood, delicate, feminine, yours?" She gasped, slamming the door without reply. In the cab back to Whitehaven Mansions, Poirot pondered. Clara's tears seemed real, her love a double-edged blade, capable of protection or destruction. The missing vial, the locket, her flimsy alibi, clues pointing to complicity? Or a scapegoat in a grander scheme? A false clue emerged in his mind. The sedative could be a plant, diverting from the true killer. The mystery burgeoned, shadows of betrayal lengthening like the evening dusk. Clara's devotion, once a virtue, now loomed as a potential vice. As the cab rattled on, a figure trailed in the fog, watching, waiting. The web tightened, promising revelations in the chapters ahead. Chapter 6, The Patient's Grudge. The East End pub, the Anchor and Crown, squatted amid the labyrinthine alleys of Whitechapel like a weathered sentinel from a bygone era. Its sign creaked in the evening breeze, depicting a faded maritime scene that spoke of lost voyages and forgotten dreams. Inside, the air was thick with the acrid tang of pipe tobacco, stale ale, and the murmur of working men's voices, dockers, labourers, and the occasional clerk seeking respite from the grind. Gaslights cast a jaundiced glow over scarred wooden tables and benches worn smooth by countless patrons. It was here, far from the polished veneer of Harley Street, that Hercule Poirot arranged to meet Mr. Arthur Greaves, the embittered widower whose grudge against Dr. Reginald Hawthorne burned like a slow fuse. Poirot entered unobtrusively, his immaculate attire, a tailored overcoat and Homburg hat, drawing curious glances from the regulars. He navigated the haze to a corner booth where Greaves awaited, a burly figure hunched over a pint of bitter. Greaves was a man forged in the fires of industry. Broad shoulders from years at the shipyards, calloused hands that could crush stone, and a face etched with lines of hardship. His eyes, red-rimmed and shadowed, held the hollow stare of grief turned to rage. "Monsieur Greaves," Poirot greeted, removing his hat with a flourish. "I am Hercule Poirot. Merci for agreeing to this rendezvous. The matter is most delicate." Greaves grunted, gesturing to the bench opposite. "Delicate? That butcher Hawthorne killed my Mary, and now he's dead himself. Justice, if you ask me." His voice was gravelly, laced with the East End accent that rolled like thunder. Poirot settled, ordering a small sherry to blend in, though it drew a smirk from the barman. "Tell me of your wife, monsieur. The operation, it was to be routine, no?" Greaves's fists clenched, knuckles whitening. "Appendicitis, they said. Hawthorne promised it'd be quick. But complications, sepsis, infection. She lingered for days, screaming in agony. I held her hand as she slipped away. That man, with his fancy degrees and society patience, played God and failed." The detective's green eyes gleamed with empathy, but his mind dissected every word. Motive roared like a lion here. Vengeance for a life stolen. And you vowed revenge, as one does in such pain. Witnesses say you lurked near the clinic that night, shouting threats. Greaves leaned forward, his breath heavy with ale. I was there. Around 11:30, fueled by whiskey and wrath. Yelled at the windows, called him a murderer. But I didn't go in. Doors locked, lights dim, stumbled home after to my empty bed. Poirot probed. An alibi, perhaps? Someone to confirm? Greaves nodded toward the bar. Molly, the barmaid here. I stopped in after, nursed another pint till closing. She'll vouch. Poirot's gaze drifted to Greaves's hands. Massive, veined, capable of wielding a scalpel with brute force. Your profession, monsieur. It requires strength. A scalpel in such hands could strike true. Greaves barked a laugh, bitter as gall. Strike! I'd have throttled the bastard if I'd the chance, but suicide, fitting end for a guilty soul. Yet, as he spoke, Poirot noticed a bulge in Greaves's pocket. A handkerchief, edges stained dark. With a subtle gesture, he inquired, May I see that cloth? Most curious. Reluctantly, Greaves produced it. A cotton square, crusted with what appeared to be blood. Nosebleed from the cold. Happens often in the yards. Poirot examined it under the light. Dried, flaky, but was it human? A red herring, perhaps? Or evidence planted to incriminate? The police! They might test this. Blood types, you know. Greaves snatched it back. You're barking up the wrong tree, detective. I hated him, sure, but killing? Nah. Look to his fancy friends. That rival doctor. Or his cold fish of a wife. The pub's clamour swelled as more patrons arrived, their laughter a stark counterpoint to the grim tale unfolding. Poirot delved deeper. Hawthorne's reputation, the lawsuit Greaves had threatened but never pursued. Money couldn't bring her back, Greaves muttered, but his ruin, that I'd have savoured. Clues emerged piecemeal. Greaves admitted writing anonymous letters to the press, fueling the scandal. But murder? His rage seemed cathartic, not calculated. As the interview waned, Greaves rose unsteadily. Find the real killer if there is one. My Mary's ghost deserves peace. Poirot watched him lumber to the bar, then slipped out into the night. The fog had thickened, swirling like conspirators' whispers. Reaching his waiting taxi, he found a note slipped under the door. Unsigned, scrawled in block letters. Look closer at the family, debts run deep. A tip from Greaves? Or another player in the shadows? In the cab's dim interior, Poirot pondered. Greaves's grudge was palpable, his alibi shaky. The barmaid could be swayed by loyalty or coin. The handkerchief, innocent nosebleed or clinic blood. Red herrings abounded, diverting from the true path. Yet the man's raw emotion rang true, vengeance unspoken, perhaps, but not enacted. The web expanded. Family debts hinted at financial motives, tying back to Lang and Eleanor. The city lights blurred as the taxi sped toward Whitehaven Mansions. Poirot's grey cells danced, assembling fragments into a mosaic. Greaves, a convenient scapegoat? Or the blunt instrument of another's scheme? The grudge, like the fog, obscured but did not conceal. Revelations loomed as the mystery hurtled toward its core. Chapter 7. The Vanishing Evidence. The fog had descended upon Harley Street like a veil drawn over secrets too perilous to reveal, as Hercule Poirot returned to the clinic under the cover of dusk. The building loomed silent and foreboding, its windows dark eyes staring into the abyss of night. Armed with a skeleton key procured from Inspector Japp, reluctantly, for the yard preferred protocols, Poirot slipped inside, his patent leather shoes whispering against the tiled floor. The air was stale, laced with the ghostly remnants of antiseptic and blood, an olfactory reminder of the tragedy that had unfolded here. His purpose was singular: to unearth the vanishing evidence that teased at the edges of his deductions, fragments that refused to coalesce into a coherent whole. Poirot made his way to Hawthorne's private office, a sanctum of leather-bound ledgers and anatomical charts that mapped the human body like uncharted territories. The desk, a monolithic piece of mahogany, bore the scars of frantic searches, drawers ajar, papers scattered like fallen leaves. But Poirot's little grey cells had whispered of concealment. With methodical precision, he tapped the walls, his ear pressed close, listening for the hollow echo of deception. Ah, there, in the panel behind a portrait of Hippocrates, the father of medicine, whose stern gaze seemed to judge the intruder's audacity. A subtle click, and the safe swung open, its contents spilling forth like confessions from a guilty soul. Documents cascaded, financial statements yellowed with age, revealing a precipice of ruin. Malpractice suits from aggrieved patients, including the Forsyth debacle, had drained Hawthorne's coffers. Debts to creditors mounted like storm clouds, loans from shadowy figures in the city, interest compounding like a malignant growth. Mon Dieu, Poirot murmured, his moustache quivering. The guilt in the note! It was not merely for a life lost, but for a fortune squandered. Yet, amid the ledgers, a discrepancy. Entries suggesting embezzlement, funds siphoned to an anonymous account. Lang's name appeared in marginal notes, crossed out vehemently. Partnership dissolved in ink and acrimony. But the crown jewel, or rather the forged gem, was the suicide note itself, preserved in an evidence envelope from Japp's earlier visit. Poirot compared it to samples of Hawthorne's handwriting, elegant loops in patient charts, precise signatures on prescriptions. The note's script was close, a masterful imitation, but the pressure of the pen varied, the slant inconsistent. "Forged!" Poirot exclaimed to the empty room, "by one who knew his hand well, perhaps too well." Who? A wife intimate with his correspondence? A nurse versed in his dictations? Or a rival with access through stolen missives? Re-examining the operating theatre, Poirot donned a magnifying glass, his figure a silhouette against the sterile white. The blood pool, now congealed and darkened, held its secrets. There, in the dried crimson, a footprint, partial, overlooked in the initial frenzy. Delicate, the imprint of a woman's shoe, size perhaps 7 or 8. Not Greaves's lumbering boot, nor Lang's polished brogue. Lady Eleanor's dainty heels, or Clara's practical nursing flats? Suspicion shifted like sand in an hourglass, pointing toward feminine intrigue. Interrogating the maid, Elsie, anew in the kitchen quarters, Poirot coaxed memories from her frightened lips. Seated at a scarred pine table, a cup of strong tea steaming between them, she fidgeted under his gaze. "Miss Hargrove, the arguments, you mentioned voices raised. Recall, if you please, the words exchanged." Elsie twisted her apron. "It was earlier that week, sir. Dr. Hawthorne and Dr. Lang, in the office. Something about money missing from the clinic. Funds. Embezzlement, the doctor shouted. You'll ruin us both. Lang stormed out, face like thunder. Poirot's eyes narrowed. A motive solidified. Financial betrayal leading to fatal confrontation. A new clue materialized in the dispensary. A glass-fronted cabinet of vials and syringes. Inventory cross-checked against records revealed a missing ampule of barbiturate, potent enough to induce stupor without resistance. Nearby, a syringe, unused but prepared, its needle glinting ominously. Poisoned? A backup plan for the scalpel's failure. Red herring planted to mislead or evidence of premeditation. Poirot pocketed a sample for analysis, his mind assembling timelines like an intricate clockwork. Clara left at 11, per her statement, yet the maid heard footsteps after. Greaves sighted at 11:30, bellowing threats from the street. Lang's alleged visit at midnight, denied but whispered by witnesses. The pieces fit unevenly, gaps yawning like chasms. The puzzle, it mocks me, Poirot whispered, frustration edging his voice. As night deepened, the clinic creaked with the wind's lament. Poirot lingered, feigning departure but concealing himself in the alcove shadows. His patience rewarded. A key turned in the lock. Soft footsteps approached the office. A figure, cloaked in darkness, tampered with the safe, rifling through documents, seeking to erase traces. Poirot stepped forth, his cane raised like a scepter. "Halt! Hercule Poirot sees all!" The intruder whirled. Clara Benson, her face ashen, eyes wide with terror. "Monsieur, I came for my things." But her hands clutched incriminating papers, ledgers implicating Lang or herself. Confronted, she bolted, fleeing into the fog-shrouded street. Poirot pursued, his breath coming in puffs, but the mist swallowed her like a phantom. "Arrêtez!" he called, but only echoes replied. Panting at the alley's mouth, he found a dropped glove, hers scented with lavender. A trail of unanswered questions unfurled. Accomplice or innocent? The vanishing evidence pointed to conspiracy, but whose? The city slept, unaware of the drama unfolding in its veins. Poirot hailed a hansom cab, his mind ablaze. The safe's secrets, the forged note, the feminine footprint, all threads in a tapestry of deceit. But as the cab clattered away, a shadow detached from the wall, watching, plotting. The hunter became the hunted, and the night held its breath for the revelations to come. Chapter 8. Shadows of Deception. The grand drawing-room of the Hawthorne estate in Mayfair hummed with an undercurrent of unease as the suspects assembled under Hercule Poirot's summons. The room, opulent with its crystal chandeliers casting prismatic light on Persian rugs and mahogany panelling, felt oppressively close despite its size. Velvet curtains framed tall windows, overlooking the fog-bound gardens, where twilight bled into night like ink on parchment. A fire crackled in the marble hearth, but it did little to dispel the chill of anticipation. Poirot stood at the centre, his diminutive figure commanding as a general on the battlefield, his moustache impeccably waxed, his eyes sharp as surgical steel. "Ladies and gentlemen," Poirot began, his voice resonant with Belgian precision, "you are gathered here not for tea and sympathy, but for clarification, an unveiling of the shadows that cloak the death of Dr. Reginald Hawthorne. What appears as suicide is, in truth, murder most cunning, disguised with the artistry of a master forger." The group shifted uncomfortably. Lady Eleanor Hawthorne, elegant in mourning black, her diamond necklace glinting like accusations. Dr. Victor Lang, angular and defensive, puffing nervously on a cigar. Miss Clara Benson, her nurse's uniform a stark white against the room's richness, eyes downcast, and Mr. Arthur Greaves, burly and brooding, his calloused hands clenched in his lap. Inspector Japp lurked in the corner, notebook at the ready, his moustache twitching in solidarity with Poirot's. Poirot paced slowly, his cane punctuating each revelation like a metronome of truth. We begin with the minor deceptions, the threads that, when pulled, unravel the tapestry. Madame Hawthorne, he turned to Eleanor, your affair with Dr. Lang, it is no secret to the little grey cells. The torn letter in your wastebasket, the furtive glances. Jealousy, perhaps. or a plot to escape a crumbling marriage? Eleanor's composure cracked, her cheeks flushing. "How dare you? It was nothing, a fleeting indiscretion. Reginald knew, but we reconciled." Lang interjected, his voice sharp. "Lies! She pursued me, weary of Hawthorne's neglect." The room erupted in murmurs, accusations flying like daggers. Undeterred, Poirot pivoted to Clara. "Mademoiselle Benson, your devotion borders on the obsessive. The locket with his photograph, the stolen funds from the clinic to fund, what? Gifts? Or a desperate bid for his attention?" Clara's eyes welled with tears. "I took small sums, yes, to help with his debts. He was drowning, and no one cared. But murder never." Greaves snorted derisively. "All of you, with your fancy lives. Hawthorne killed my wife. That's the real crime here." Poirot nodded. "Ah, Monsieur Greaves, your fabricated alibi. The barmaid Molly. She confessed under gentle questioning. You paid her to lie. You were near the clinic longer than admitted, your grudge a blazing fire." Tension simmered to a boil, voices rising in a cacophony of denials and recriminations. Eleanor pointed at Lang. "You embezzled from the partnership. Reginald discovered it." Lang shot back. "And you squandered his fortune on lovers and luxuries." Clara wept openly. "He loved me in his way. You all poisoned him." Greaves pounded the table. "Justice for Mary. That's all I wanted." Poirot raised his hands for silence, his presence quelling the storm. "These deceptions, they are but smoke. Now, a clue emerges, a letter implicating Monsieur Greaves, found in the clinic's waste. I'll make you pay," it reads in his hand. Greaves leapt up. "Planted! I never wrote that." Poirot feigned contemplation. "Perhaps, or perhaps not. Let us see who squirms." The drama peaked, the air thick with suspicion. Poirot noticed overlooked details. The scalpel's angle, suggesting a left-handed assailant. Greaves was right-handed, Clara ambidextrous, but Lang definitively left-handed, as evidenced by his cigar grip. "Accusations fly, but the truth hides in plain sight," Poirot declared. "The killer struck with precision, forging the note to mask greed and betrayal." Lang sweated profusely, his tic returning. "Ridiculous! My alibi holds." But Poirot pressed. "The doorman at your club? He recalls you leaving briefly, time enough for murder." Suddenly, a gust rattled the windows, and the room plunged into darkness. The chandelier's lights extinguished, the fire dimming as if by spectral hand. Gasps echoed, furniture scraped. In the blackout, chaos reigned, a scuffle, a cry, the thud of a body. Poirot, ever prepared, flicked on a pocket torch, its beam cutting through the gloom like a scalpel through flesh. The group froze. Eleanor clutched her throat. Clara cowered. Greaves stood fists raised, Lang backed against the wall. A vase lay shattered. A decoy struck in desperation. "Mon Dieu! A desperate act to silence the revelations," Poirot exclaimed, his light revealing no injuries but heightened fear. The power restored with a flicker, bulbs humming back to life. "Who tampered with the fuse? The guilty one, no?" Fingers pointed anew, but Poirot halted them. "Enough games. The shadows deepen, but dawn approaches." He had drawn out confessions, glimpsed motives in the panic. Lang's hand trembled. Clara's eyes darted to the door. As the gathering dispersed under Yap's watchful eye, Poirot lingered, piecing the mosaic. The planted letter, Clara's doing, her handwriting mimicking Greaves's. The blackout, Lang's ploy. Deceptions layered like fog, but the little grey cells pierced through. Outside, the night whispered promises of storm, mirroring the turmoil within. The estate's shadows concealed more, A hidden alliance, perhaps? Poirot stepped into the mist, his mind ablaze. The confrontation had exposed fractures. The final act loomed, where truth would strike like lightning. Chapter 9. The Gathering Storm. The chandelier's lights flickered back to life with a hesitant hum, bathing the Hawthorne drawing room in a harsh glow that revealed the disarray of panic. Shards of porcelain from the shattered vase glittered on the Persian rug like scattered diamonds, a testament to the desperation that had gripped the room moments before. Hercule Poirot stood unscathed in the centre, his pocket torch now extinguished, his expression one of calm authority amid the chaos. The suspects, frozen in their postures of alarm, slowly relaxed, Lady Eleanor Hawthorne clutching a chair for support, her face pale as alabaster. Dr. Victor Lang backed against the wall, his left hand trembling. Miss Clara Benson huddled near the hearth, her eyes wide with fright, and Mr. Arthur Greaves, fists still raised, glowering at the shadows. Inspector Japp, ever the stalwart, moved to secure the doors, his voice booming, "No one leaves until we sort this." "A desperate act indeed," Poirot declared, his voice cutting through the tension like a scalpel through silk. "To plunge the room into darkness, to strike at a mere vase, thinking it was Poirot, perhaps. It reveals the guilty conscience, the fear of exposure." He dusted imaginary lint from his sleeve, his green eyes sweeping the assembly. "But fear not, the little grey cells, they are not so easily shattered. Let us reassemble, mes amis, and piece together this puzzle of deceit and death." The group, under Japp's watchful eye, returned to their seats, the air thick with unspoken accusations. The fire crackled mockingly, casting flickering shadows that danced like phantoms on the walls. Poirot resumed his pacing, his cane tapping a rhythmic cadence. We return to the night of the tragedy. Dr. Reginald Hawthorne, tormented not by a single failed operation, but by a web of financial ruin. The ledgers in his safe, they reveal embezzlement, funds siphoned away like blood from a vein. And who benefited? Dr. Lang, the ambitious rival, whose partnership stake grew fat on stolen coin. Lang's face contorted in denial, his cigar forgotten in an ashtray. Lies! Hawthorne mismanaged his own affairs, debts from his wife's extravagances. But Poirot raised a hand, silencing him. "Non, doctor. Hawthorne discovered your theft weeks ago, confronted you in private. On that fateful night, you visited the clinic under pretense of reconciliation. Words turned to blows, a struggle ensued. In the heat of passion, you seized the scalpel, striking true to his heart. Then the clever forgery, the suicide note, mimicking his hand to perfection, invoking guilt to mask your greed." The room gasped collectively. Eleanor leaned forward, her voice a whisper. "Victor, you did this!" Lang snarled, his angular features sharpening. "Preposterous! My alibi!" Poirot interrupted smoothly. "Your club doorman recalls a brief absence, time enough to slip to Harley Street and back, and the glove at the scene monogrammed with your initials. Careless, for one so precise." But Poirot was not finished. Yet the plot thickens. Miss Benson, you witnessed the deed, hidden in the shadows, perhaps lingering out of devotion, or to pilfer more funds for your unrequited dreams. Instead of alerting the authorities, you blackmailed Lang, demanding a share of the ill-gotten gains. This explains your flight from the clinic when I discovered the safe. Fear that your complicity would surface. Clara's sobs broke the silence, her hands covering her face. I saw it all. He promised me everything, position, affection, if I kept silent, but I couldn't, not fully. Greaves, sensing vindication, pounded his fist on the armrest. I knew it. That butcher got what he deserved, but not by my hand. Poirot nodded. Indeed, Monsieur Greaves, you were the convenient scapegoat. The planted letter in your handwriting, the bloody handkerchief, fabrications to divert suspicion. Your genuine grudge made you the perfect foil, but your alibi, though bought, holds fragments of truth. You shouted from the street, but entered not. Eleanor's eyes darted between the accused, her composure fracturing. I provided no alibis knowingly. Reginald and I, we had our troubles, but I loved him. Poirot's gaze softened momentarily. Madame, you were unwitting, a pawn in the game. Your bridge game that night, your emotional distance, they served to isolate the victim. But your heart, it seems, is not stained with blood. The deductions hung in the air like storm clouds gathering force. Lang, cornered like a rat in a trap, lunged suddenly toward the door, his left hand grasping for escape. You'll prove nothing, he snarled. But Japp was quicker, his burly frame blocking the path, handcuffs glinting in the light. Not so fast, Doctor. You're nicked. Lang struggled briefly, then sagged in defeat, his ambitions crumbling like the vase's remnants. Yet, a twist unfurled as the door burst open, Clara Benson, who had slipped away in the confusion. No, she had returned of her own volition, her face streaked with tears but resolute. Wait, there's more. The room fell silent, all eyes upon her. I supplied the sedative, that missing vial. Lang asked for it earlier, claiming it for a patient. I didn't know, but when I saw the murder, I realized it subdued Reginald, made the struggle one-sided. I'm an accomplice, unwitting at first, but complicit in silence. Gasps echoed anew. Japp's notebook scribbled furiously. Poirot inclined his head. Brave, mademoiselle, to confess. The storm breaks, revealing the lightning of truth. Resolution neared, the pieces aligning like stars in a clearing sky. But one thread remained untied, a lingering question of the forged note's accomplice. Perhaps another hand in the shadows. The estate's grandeur felt smaller now, oppressed by revelations. Outside, thunder rumbled distantly, mirroring the gathering storm within hearts and minds. Poirot's grey cells hummed. The final unveiling beckoned. Chapter 10. The Final Revelation. The Hawthorne drawing-room, once a bastion of elegance, now felt like a courtroom under the weight of impending justice. The chandelier's light, steady once more, illuminated the faces of the assembled. Lady Eleanor's poised features etched with shock. Dr. Victor Lang in handcuffs, his angular frame slumped in defeat. Miss Clara Benson, tear-streaked and resolute, confessing her part. Mr. Arthur Greaves, vindicated but sombre, and Inspector Japp, his notebook filled with the night's revelations. Hercule Poirot stood at the hearth, the fire's glow casting him as a silhouette of triumph, his little grey cells, having orchestrated the denouement with masterful precision. Mes amis, Poirot began, his voice a symphony of deduction. The storm has broken, and in its wake, the truth emerges clear as the London sky after fog. Dr. Reginald Hawthorne did not take his own life. He was murdered in cold blood, a crime woven from threads of greed, jealousy, and betrayal. Allow Hercule Poirot to unveil the full tapestry, step by step, that you may see the logic irrefutable. He turned first to Lang, who glared with the defiance of a cornered animal. Dr. Victor Lang, your ambition was the seed of this evil. For years you envied Hawthorne's acclaim, his patience, his innovations, but envy turned to theft. Embezzling from the clinic's partnership, siphoning funds to bolster your own failing practice. Hawthorne discovered the discrepancies. Ledgers hidden in his safe bore your name, crossed out in anger. Weeks ago, he confronted you, demanding restitution. You feigned remorse, but plotted revenge. Poirot paced, his cane emphasizing each point. On the night of the murder, you arranged a late meeting under pretense of settlement, but you came prepared. From Miss Benson, unwittingly, you obtained a sedative vial, claiming it for a patient. Slipped into Hawthorne's tea during your discussion, it subdued him, clouding his senses without full unconsciousness. As he weakened, the argument reignited. In the struggle, but it was one-sided, you seized his own scalpel, striking with your left hand, the angle perfect for a southpaw like yourself. The wound was fatal, but deliberate, mimicking self-infliction. Clara interjected softly, her voice trembling. I lingered that night, hoping to speak with Reginald alone. Through the door, I heard the scuffle, saw Lang strike. I burst in too late. Poirot nodded. Oui, mademoiselle, but instead of raising the alarm, your spurned heart twisted. You saw opportunity. Blackmail Lang for silence, perhaps even a share in the inheritance. Together, you forged the suicide note, your knowledge of Hawthorne's script aiding the deception. The guilt referenced not just the botched operation, but the financial ruin you both exacerbated. Eleanor gasped, her hand to her mouth. Clara, you loved him. How could you? Clara's eyes flashed with bitter fire. Loved him. He rejected me for his work. For you, a wife who strayed into Lang's arms. Jealousy. Yes, I framed you subtly. The feminine footprint was mine, left deliberately. The torn letter from your lover, planted in the wastebasket. I wanted you suspected, suffering as I did. Greaves, silent until now, leaned forward. And me, the planted evidence, the letter, the handkerchief? Poirot smiled faintly. Red herrings, monsieur, to muddy the waters. Lang and Clara knew of your grudge. They fabricated clues to point to you. A vengeful patient with motive and opportunity. Your shouts from the street that night provided the perfect distraction. Your paid alibi, a weakness to exploit. But the blood on the cloth? From a clinic sample, not your nosebleed, innocence prevails for you. Japp stepped forward, his cuffs clinking. Solid work, Poirot. Lang for murder. Benson as accessory after the fact. Forgery, tampering, blackmail. Lang snarled, struggling briefly. You'll never prove the sedative. But Poirot produced the vial sample from his pocket. Analysis will confirm, doctor. And the glove? Your monogram left in haste. Careless for a surgeon. Eleanor rose, her voice steady despite the turmoil. Reginald's legacy, the clinic, his research, what becomes of it? Poirot's expression softened. Madame, with the guilty exposed, it endures untainted. Your inheritance, purged of embezzled shadows, can fund the good he intended. Society will remember him as the healer, not the victim. As Japp led Lang and Clara away, Lang protesting futilely, Clara weeping in remorse, the room emptied, leaving Poirot with Eleanor and Greaves. Justice, it is bittersweet, Poirot mused. For the dead, closure. For the living, scars. Greaves nodded gruffly. My Mary's avenged indirectly. Hawthorne paid for his mistake, but not by my hand. Eleanor extended her hand. Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. Without you, the fog would have lingered eternal. Outside, the London night had cleared, stars piercing the veil like clues in the dark. Poirot hailed a cab to Whitehaven Mansions, the case resolved. The little grey cells prevail once more, he proclaimed to the empty street, his moustache twitching in satisfaction. Hawthorne's death, a cautionary tale of ambition's perils, faded into the annals of crime. The surgeon's strange case closed, but in Poirot's mind, the echoes of deduction lingered, a symphony eternal.